Hello and welcome to the Farming Week, the podcast from Agriland keeping you up to date with all the latest in Irish agriculture. I'm Charles O'Donnell and I'm joined by Aisling O'Brien. We've got a lot to get to this week, but just to bring you some breaking news this afternoon, wholesaler Musgrave, which supplies Centra and SuperValu, has announced a price reduction on milk and butter. That follows similar announcements from Tesco and Lidl today. The IFA has criticised those reductions, saying they are a massive concern for farmers and a kick in the teeth. Stay tuned to Agriland for further coverage of those retailer price reductions. But the talk of the country this week, apart of course from the soccer match in Prague tonight between Ireland and the Czech Republic, is the government's move to reduce the cost of fuel, including green diesel. Fuel has increased sharply in cost since the beginning of hostilities in the Middle East involving the US, Israel and Iran, with green diesel being particularly impacted. So Aisling, what did the government announce this week and how's it going down?
Yes, Charles. So on Tuesday, the government signed off on their measures to tackle rising fuel costs due to the ongoing war in the Middle East. And as we spoke about last week here on the podcast, it was excise duty that they focused in on. So the government confirmed a reduction in excise of 3 cents a litre to the cost of green diesel. But it should be noted that follows an approximate price increase of around 73 cents a litre for green diesel over the past month. In the same package, petrol was cut by 15 cents a litre while diesel was reduced by 20 cents a litre. Those measures are set to remain in place until May 31st. The government also confirmed that it will reduce the NORA levy. NORA is the National Oil Reserves Agency by 2 cents a litre for a period of 2 months. The government also increased the maximum repayment allowed under the diesel rebate scheme from 7.5 cents a litre up to 12 cents a litre of diesel for hauliers and passenger bus operators. That will apply to diesel purchased from the start of this year until the end of June this year. And for households, the fuel allowance season is set to be extended by an additional 4 weeks. Taoiseach Micheál Martin said the government were mindful of the challenges being faced by increased fuel costs and they remain fully committed to supporting those most at risk. And he said they're continuing to monitor the situation and will respond accordingly as the need arises. But the measures, they were welcomed in some quarters, but it was a fairly frosty reception when it came to the farming sector, Charles. The Irish Farmers Association said that the new tax cuts to agri-diesel were derisory and they would have little or no impact at farm level. And Francie Gorman, the IFA president, said the IFA had been clear that the only effective way to address costs at farm level was to reduce carbon tax, but he said the government seems to have deemed this as untouchable. The ICMSA, the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, criticised the reduction as well when it came to green diesel, and they said that it was penny pinching by the government. Dennis Drennan, the ICMSA president, said the cut for green diesel was wholly inadequate in terms of addressing the soaring farm inputs, including fuel and fertiliser, at a time when dairy and beef prices are either below the cost of production or slumping fast. The Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers Association, the ICSA, said the government measures to address rising fuel costs would not protect food production in this country. And they said that hauliers are benefiting from extra retrospective support, which is welcome, but farmers are still only getting a small cut that makes little difference in reality on the ground. The Irish Grain Growers Group said that the government's fuel measures were discouraging to tillage farmers. They said that fuel isn't optional in the springtime, it's essential, and this step shows a clear failure of realities facing those busy working to keep food production on the ground growing. As you can imagine, the opposition reaction as well was pretty scathing, Charles. Sinn Féin spokesperson on agriculture and food, Martin Kenny, he said that it was tokenism and insulting, the cuts to the excise duty on green diesel, and he said that Sinn Féin were tabling an amendment to the government's proposals of fuel prices, which he said would reduce green diesel by 10 cents a litre. Now, Independent Ireland, they also tabled a comprehensive amendment of their own on this, and the TD Michael Fitzmaurice said that the efforts outlined by the government when it came to farming and to green diesel, he said it was a token reduction of a few cents a litre and it would not make a meaningful difference to struggling farm families on the ground.
Now, of course, Aisling, the issue of green diesel is vital to agri-contractors, especially as silage season will be among us fairly soon. So what have the contractors been saying about it?
Yes, Charles, this week we caught up with Anne Gleeson-Hanrahan, and Anne is the Managing Director of the Association of Farm and Forestry Contractors in Ireland, known as the FCI. And I suppose she really did lay bare how the spike in fuel prices is impacting on the contracting sector and in turn will impact on farmers on the ground as well. And she said that a single tractor is costing €237 extra per day in diesel costs at the moment. And she said the contracting sector burns 350 million litres of diesel per year. And with the way that prices currently are standing, the sector is looking at an additional extra cost of €224 million in 2026. And she said that is before you take into account additional costs of depreciation, maintenance, insurance, labour, and additional costs as well. And she said this is going to affect food security and food cost. And she said in the last economic downturn that we experienced, contractors were able to slowly absorb costs. But she said this wouldn't be the case this time. And in the current climate in 2026, contractors are in a position where the money from today's job will be needed for tomorrow's fuel. She also outlined to us her estimates for the impact on the cost of harvesting silage due to rising fuel prices. And the figures that she presented were pretty stark. Take a listen.
And all the sectors across. So I based it on 100 acres. And for a full, say, self-propelled outfit, say it is going to cost an extra €2,855 plus VAT per day to cut that same 100 acres of silage. That's an astronomical fee that's just not possible, say, for our sector to cover. Or how do we even pass this cost on?
So the FCI, Charles, is calling on the government for a 50 cent a litre rebate in a bid to protect the contracting industry. And Anne Gleeson-Hanrahan said contractors are the forgotten race. And she said the organisation has said that intervention is essential for Irish food supply as well as jobs within the contracting sector.
And of course, there's another key agri input that's been impacted by the Middle East conflict, and that's fertiliser. There were fresh concerns over that side of it this week as well, I understand, Aisling.
Yeah, so we previously reported how Minister of State at the Department of Agriculture, Michael Healy-Rae, recently told the Dáil that there may be sufficient fertiliser stocks in the country to last until mid-April. But this week, a grassland expert has warned that Irish farmers are facing a shortage of nitrogen fertiliser as the conflict in the Middle East region continues. Dr. Patrick Cashman is a grass and forage expert at the Cork-based seed company Goldcrop, and he was commenting, I suppose, as the Strait of Hormuz, it's really at a near closure at this point. It's a critical global shipping route, and it's continuing to impact that closure or practical closure on fertiliser shipments from major producers including Iran, Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And he said these countries account for an estimated 20% of traded global nitrogen fertiliser, along with liquefied natural gas, which is LNG, and those exports that are used for nitrogen production as well. And he said that Ireland's dependence on imported fertiliser leaves farmers on the ground exposed to global conflicts and geopolitical instability. So, Charles, operators have stopped sending their vessels into the Strait of Hormuz over the fear of Iran's attacks on shipping tankers. And Iran said on Tuesday that non-hostile vessels may safely pass through the waterway in coordination with competent Iranian authorities. And the country's Ministry for Foreign Affairs said that such vessels cannot belong to the US or Israel and must not participate or cooperate in the aggressive operations against Iran. And I suppose depending on who you're listening to at the moment, either the White House or Tehran, there may or may not be negotiations going on in the background in a bid to resolve this conflict between the US and Iran. So we'll see how they pan out over the coming days. And I suppose we're all hoping and praying that there is a positive outcome. And Patrick Cashman did note that Russia also accounts for about 20% of the global fertiliser trade. And he said that we can't have a farming system that's dependent on inputs coming from volatile regions of the world. And he's urged the Department of of Agriculture to reinforce its messaging about how clover-rich grass swards can help farmers ease their reliance on nitrogen fertilisers. And I suppose before we leave fertiliser, Charles, interesting to note efforts around Europe in response to the crisis. The Spanish government has actually approved a support package for farmers that includes direct aid to help Spanish farmers buy fertiliser. And they've also approved support that is specific for purchases of agri-diesel as well. So it'll be interesting to see if that heaps more pressure on the government here.
We'll move on now and go from talking about farm inputs to farm outputs, particularly beef. Beef prices at the moment have been on a downward trend over recent weeks, with concerns now over the sustainability of those prices for beef finishers. What are the nature of those concerns, Aisling?
Yeah, so the chair of the ICMSA Livestock Committee, Michael O'Connell, said this week that punishing losses were being inflicted on beef finishers due to current factory price cuts. He said that cattle finishers are currently receiving 1 kg less compared to when the majority of the cattle were bought. And he said this is the fourth successive week when processors have moved to pull prices. And he called on meat processors to show some respect for farm finishers and break down where they think the market is heading. And he claimed that some farmers have been told that they may have to wait up to 3 weeks to get their cattle slaughtered. The ICMSA beef chair also called on the Minister for Agriculture, Martin Hayden, to investigate why 41,000 tonnes of beef was imported into the country last year. And he urged the agri-food regulator to investigate these concerns in the supply chain, as well as the collapse of beef prices in the past few months. Now, the Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers Association Beef Committee Chair Sean Sherman said that Meat Industry Ireland and factory management have to be called before the Oireachtas to explain what's going on when it comes to beef prices. And he said that farmers cannot continue to operate in a vacuum where prices can be cut at will without explanation. He said beef farmers need answers and they need clarity. He said above all, they need a system that allows them to plan ahead with some degree of certainty about their future. The IFA Livestock Chair Declan Hanrahan also slammed what he called the relentless beef price cuts, and he claimed that reductions in prices for cattle are opportunistic, irresponsible and reckless. And according to the IFA, Irish prices are currently the worst in the EU. And the IFA said its livestock committee had contacted all meat factories to meet up and discuss the recent beef price reductions. But as of the, publication of that statement, the IFA said that none of the factories had responded with a meeting date at that point. But we'll wait and see if anything comes from that request.
Moving on now, and the EU's trading relationships have again entered the agri-news cycle, this time on the opposite side of the world from Mercosur. A new trade deal has been signed between the EU and Australia, which has generated both praise and criticism. Aisling, firstly, do we know what this trade deal means for EU farmers? And second, what's been the reaction to it?
Yeah, so after almost 10 years of negotiations, the EU and Australia finally signed a free trade agreement this week. It's going to remove over 99% of tariffs on EU goods exported to Australia, cutting some €1 billion a year in duties for companies of all sizes. And according to the European Commission, EU exports are expected to grow by up to 33% over the next decade under this deal. And they did identify key sectors with strong growth potential, including the dairy sector, which they said is expected to increase by up to 48%. Now, the agreement will eliminate tariffs on the majority of EU exports, such as cheeses, meat preparations, wine, some fruit and vegetables, chocolate and sugar confectionery. But for some sensitive products, access to the EU market for Australian farmers will be limited by what the Commission said would be carefully calibrated tariff rate quotas, which will be gradually implemented. For beef, the EU will open 2 tariff rate quotas for Australian farmers, totalling 30,600 tonnes, with half of that entering duty-free and subject to a grass-fed conditionality. The remaining 13,770 tonnes is to be imported with a reduced duty of 7.5%. Those volumes will be gradually phased in over 10 years from the entry into force of the agreement. Now, it was understood, Charles, that Australian farmers had sought a 50,000 tonne preferential quota for beef. Now, for dairy, the Commission said they would be putting in place tariff rate quotas for skim milk, for butter and for whey protein concentrates. And the EU will also open 2 tariff rate quotas for sheep and goat meat of a total of 25,000 tonnes, which would be imported duty-free, with a smaller portion limited to frozen meat. Now, the volume as well will be gradually phased in over 7 years from the entry into force of the agreement. Now, the EU said it can impose safeguard measures in the event of a surge of agri-food imports from Australia when it causes or threatens to cause serious injury to an EU industry. And they said that no agri-food products from Australia would enter the EU without respecting all of the EU's health and safety standards. And the deal has had mixed reactions. Charles, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade Helen McEntee welcomed the signing of the deal. She said more than ever in the face of unprecedented global economic uncertainty, it's important for Ireland and the EU to diversify our markets with new, reliable global partners. And she said that this deal represents a great opportunity for Irish firms to do just that. But she did say the government will continue to engage with the European Commission and advocate for Irish interests, including agricultural interests, as this deal is finalised in the coming months. Fianna Fáil MEP Billy Kelleher said that Ireland must fully support this deal. He said Ireland was right to oppose the Mercosur deal for our own particular reasons, but he didn't believe that the same issues arise with this deal. Fine Gael MEP Maria Walsh said the deal was a win for the Irish economy and it could benefit the Irish dairy sector, but she did acknowledge that there are risks associated with any trade deal. And she said she'd be working to ensure that the Irish agriculture sector both benefits from the agreement where possible and is protected where necessary. Fine Gael MEP for Ireland South Sean Kelly described the signing of the agreement as a timely and strategic boost for Ireland's economy. Now, UCOLE, which is the European Dairy Trade Association, said this was bringing about a positive outlook for the dairy sector. And they said that exports of EU dairy products to Australia reached nearly 400 million euro in 2025. But the European Milk Board, of which the ICMSA is a member, called for a halt to free trade deals at the expense of producers. Midlands Northwest MEP Kieran Malooly called for an assessment to be carried out on the combined effects of EU trade deals on Irish beef and sheep farmers. This was echoed by the IFA President Francie Gorman, and he said farmers feel like they're being used as a sacrificial lamb when it comes to these trade deals. And Copa Gajega, the umbrella organisation representing European farmers and agri-cooperatives, of which the IFA is a member, said that the signing of this Australian trade deal raises multiple and strong concerns for European agriculture, and they slammed the decision to grant new tariff concessions to Australia in highly sensitive agricultural sectors.
And if you want more details on that EU-Australia trade deal, you can check out our sister podcast AgriFocus, in which we got the expert view of the trade deal and also the Middle East crisis. So be sure to check out AgriFocus this week, which is now available on Agriland. But Aisling, I mentioned Mercosur there a few moments ago, and there has in fact been a significant update on the EU-Mercosur trade agreement this week. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so on Monday, the EU notified the Mercosur countries about the provisional application of the controversial trade deal, Charles, and the agreement will therefore apply provisionally from May 1st this year between the EU and all Mercosur countries that complete ratification procedures by the end of this month. Now, Argentina, Brazil and Uruguay have already done that, and Paraguay is expected to follow soon as well. Now, the ICSA President Sean McNamara said he was outraged that the European Commission has moved to provisionally apply the trade deal. He said that it's happening despite the European Parliament not having voted on it, and along with the ongoing legal review being undertaken by the European Court of Justice. And he said that the ICSA is deeply disappointed in the Irish government for not doing enough to defend the agriculture sector, and in the European Commission for pressing ahead regardless of the democratic process.
We'll keep going now, and the last week saw a significant announcement for the dairy industry. So Aisling, what did dairy processors Aurivo and Dale Farm announce?
Yeah, so last Friday, Dale Farm and Aurivo announced that now is not the right time to proceed with a merger process. And we did see a number of information meetings held north and south of the border to outline what a merger between the two co-ops could entail for the farmers and for their shareholders. But instead now the co-ops have unveiled plans for an all-island strategic partnership, and a steering group with representation from both co-ops is being set up to guide this new partnership. The co-ops have had a close working relationship over the past 5 years, and we understand that the next stage is that a legal contract will be agreed upon between the co-ops within the next month, and then it's down to work on 3 specific projects which both co-ops have already identified. And we understand that this will primarily be about value-added proteins and 2 other new product developments as well. Now, both Nick Whelan, Dale Farm's CEO, and Aurivo's CEO, Donald Tierney, firmly believe that the previously proposed merger would have comfortably secured the required 75% support from members that it needed to go ahead. However, Donald Tierney told Agriland that they didn't want just to get the minimum required support. Instead, they wanted buy-in to the proposed merger, and they wanted 90% plus in favour of such a move. And he said they think that they can demonstrate the benefit of collaboration by working on this strategic partnership, which will take place, he said, over the next couple of years. And he said there's no commitment at the end of that they will enter into a merger or a joint venture. He said that will be revisited down the road, or maybe not. And Nick Whelan added that time is on their side for both co-ops in relation to the prospect of any potential merger or joint venture in the future. He said there's no pressure currently on either business to undertake such a move.
Just while we're on dairy, obviously the nitrates derogation is hugely important for the sector, and although the government secured the derogation for the next 3 years, starting this year, An Taisce seemingly has other ideas, with the environmental organisation saying this week that it has formally requested the European Commission to review the granting of the derogation and to effectively overturn it. If you want to read more about that story, you can check it out on our website and app, but we'll move on now to the issue of animal transport. EU rules on the welfare of animals in transport are currently in the process of being revised, and that matter, along with other issues facing live animal exporters, was discussed at the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture and Food this week. Aisling, what kind of concerns were raised at the committee?
Yes, Charles. So according to Board B, live animal exports from Ireland were worth an estimated €480 million last year. That's up 40% compared to 2024. And the latest figures from the Department of Agriculture for the first 11 weeks of this year show that over 50,000 cattle have been exported from Ireland in that period. Now, as you said, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture heard concerns from the live export sector this week, including that the rising cost of fuel is posing a major challenge for the industry. And we heard from Lorcan O'Doherty, and Lorcan is a livestock trade representative for the Irish Livestock Exporters Association. And he said that under current conditions, operating a transport vehicle is now approximately €90 per hour purely in fuel costs, before accounting for any labour, compliance or maintenance overheads. And he also claimed that live exports are facing growing difficulty from disinformation propagated, he claimed, by certain activist groups and non-governmental organisations. But as you mentioned, it is really those proposed new EU rules that are, I suppose, posing the greatest threat to Ireland's live export sector, which O'Doherty said in their current form would effectively end Ireland's participation in live animal trade. Now, the proposed regulations, in their current form, they would increase restrictions on live exports. They're currently being debated at EU level. Some of the changes would include reduced journey times and changes to space available on multi-deck animal lorries. And here is what Lorcan O'Doherty had to say about these proposals and how they might impact the Irish sector.
Looking ahead, the most concerning policy development on the horizon is the anticipated amendment to Council Regulation Article 1 2005. As presently indicated, the reforms under consideration by the Commission, particularly regarding journey times, on-board feeding times and stocking density, would, if implemented as drafted, effectively end Ireland's capacity to participate in legitimate live export markets. This would not constitute reform so much as constitute closure.
We'll move on now and talk about the ongoing issue of Bluetongue. As you know, there has been cases of Bluetongue in several herds in Ireland since late January, so the issue of Bluetongue vaccines is of course of paramount importance. There was some welcome news on that front this week, Aisling.
Yeah, so Minister for Agriculture Martin Hayden confirmed that the Bluetongue vaccine will be included as an option in the 2026 beef and sheep welfare schemes. Now, it's expected that the National Sheep Welfare Scheme will open for applications in the first half of April, and similar to previous years, the beef welfare scheme is due to open in August. So this year, the sheep welfare scheme will include an option to vaccinate, and farmers may choose to vaccinate against either Bluetongue or Clostridial disease, and participants in the beef welfare scheme may choose to vaccinate against either Bluetongue, Clostridial diseases or calf pneumonia. And he said spring is the optimum time for vaccinating for Bluetongue, which he said should take place before the higher risk period during the warmer summer months. But of course, it is up to every individual farmer to have a chat with their vet about a vaccination and if it is appropriate for their herd. Now, the Irish Natura and Hill Farmers Association welcomed the announcement after lobbying the minister on this issue in recent months since the discovery of the first Bluetongue case in Wexford in January. And since then, the disease has been detected in 12 herds in counties Wexford, Wicklow, Laois, Louth and Monaghan. And we learned this week as well that the department said blood samples taken since September of last year, when modelling suggests that animals were first infected with Bluetongue, have been tested. And one of these samples is now tested positive for antibodies to Bluetongue. And the department said this animal originated from a farm in County Monaghan and was slaughtered in November of last year. The ICMSA has also welcomed that Bluetongue vaccination will be included in both the beef and sheep welfare schemes, but they asked the minister to also extend that to other schemes such as the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme, known as SCEP.
And while we're talking about schemes, Aisling, there were several other updates on schemes this week.
Yeah, so on Wednesday, Minister Hayden announced the opening of Year 4 of the Sheep Improvement Scheme to new entrants. The 5-year €100 million scheme provides financial support to farmers for taking extra steps to improve the welfare of their flock. Participating farmers get up to €12 per breeding ewe per year for completing these welfare measures. Applications have to be made through the AgFood online portal by the closing date of April 29th. Also this week, we saw the start of payments totaling just over €29 million under the new National Tillage Sustainability Support Scheme. The money is being paid out to 8,554 farmers, and at an average it works out to some €3,400 per applicant, and payments are set to be visible in farmers' bank accounts in the coming days. Elsewhere, the Department of Agriculture has announced a series of in-person clinics to help farmers making their applications online for the Basic Income Support for Sustainability or BIS payment and other area-based schemes this year. Staff from the department will provide one-to-one support to help farmers to submit their scheme applications ahead of the deadline of May 15th. And farmers planning to attend those clinics have to bring details of their agfood.ie login where available, and details of their herd number and their PPSN number to verify their identity as well. In total, we've 16 farmer clinics taking place across the country, the first of which kicks off in your own fair county of Clare, Charles, on April 1st. Full details of all of those clinics available on our website and app. And finally, a key deadline for the residential zoned land tax is approaching for farmers. So as we know, the revised maps for this year were published at the end of January, which identify land that may be liable for the tax in that year. And landowners are able to apply for an exemption from the RZLT if they request a rezoning of their land, but a request to their relevant local authority to change the zoning of land has to be submitted by April 1st. So just keep that in mind if that impacts you.
Just before we move on, we'll just let you know that Irish Hereford Prime and ABP Food Group have announced details of the new Hereford breed bonus structure that will be worth up to 20 cents a kilogram on all eligible cattle. So if you want to know more about that, check out the article from our beef specialist, Breffney O'Brien. But finally this week, the Department of Agriculture is urging farmers to be aware of potential sources of lead poisoning to their animals. What do farmers need to know, Aisling?
Yeah, so the department said this week, Charles, that lead poisonings commonly peak in late spring, early summer when animals are turned out to grass. And the department has advised farmers to carefully check their fields and hedgerows for sources of lead, such as old car or tractor batteries, or maybe even old electric fencing batteries as well, before they turn their cattle out to grass, or indeed start cutting silage as well. The department said there has been some catastrophic losses that have occurred where discarded batteries have been accidentally incorporated into silage, and that silage has then been fed to cattle. And also from a public health perspective, lead exposure in milking cattle or beef cattle being readied for slaughter has the potential risk to enter the food chain as well. So the department is particularly asking farmers with hedgerows that are close and beside public roads to check those carefully for fly tipping as well of risk materials before turnout, and then to continue to regularly check those hedgerows as well and those field boundaries during the grazing season as well. As I said, along with lead batteries, there can also be a risk posed from discarded lead flashing or lead piping, or timber which has been painted with old toxic lead paints, and also from bonfire ash as well, and perhaps old tins of paint that may contain lead as well. So look, it is important that farmers should ensure that cattle don't have access to old cars or tractors or leakage from their batteries or sump oil. And if you have any lead batteries, any old batteries hanging around, just make sure to dispose of them carefully and properly. And indeed any tins of paint as well, Charles, just to rather be safe than sorry when it comes to lead.
Well, that almost brings us to the end for this week. Just before we go, we just want to let you know about Agriland's Lambing Live series, which has been running this week. The series brings viewers up close and personal with real-life situations faced by Irish sheep farmers during lambing season. So be sure to check out all the episodes on Agriland. And very finally, it's that time of year where we all ask each other if the clocks are going forward or back or up or down or wherever. So bear in mind that clocks in Ireland and across the European Union will move forward 1 hour on Sunday morning. That's March 29th. But that's where we'll leave it for this week. Please don't forget to rate, review and follow The Farming Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love if you could spare some time to give us 5 stars and share The Farming Week with anyone you think might be interested. From Aisling and myself, take care and best of luck to the boys in green in Prague tonight.